Lyra stood at the helm of her ship, staring out into the vast unknown. The stars flickered in the distance, tiny pinpricks of light that seemed to laugh at her insignificance. She was a Xanthari, a scout from a proud and ancient race that had long mastered the art of space travel. Her people had conquered the stars, forged alliances with countless other civilizations, and crushed enemies without a second thought. They were the epitome of intellect and strength. Yet, for all their achievements, the Xanthari knew one thing: humans were a myth. She had heard the stories, of course. All Xanthari children did. The humans were said to be little more than savage, war-hungry creatures, primitive beings with no understanding of the cosmos. They had been wiped out by their own stupidity, according to some accounts, while others suggested that they were hiding on some distant planet, too afraid to show themselves to the galaxy. But Lyra had never taken those tales seriously. They seemed far too exaggerated, far too fantastical. She had studied their supposed history, reading fragments of old records that painted humans as nothing more than a brief, violent blip in the universe's grand timeline. They were gone. That was all there was to it. She'd had no reason to doubt the facts, until now. Her mission had seemed simple at first. She was tasked with exploring uncharted sectors of space, mapping new regions, and collecting data to help her people expand their influence. It wasn't a prestigious job, but it was the first solo assignment she had received, and she was eager to prove herself. Her ship, the Celerus*, was equipped with the latest Xanthari technology. It could analyze and track any signal, detect any anomaly, and intercept any form of communication. She was confident that nothing could surprise her. But now, in the heart of unexplored space, Lyra felt a growing unease in the pit of her stomach. The myth of the humans had never seemed real. Until today. She glanced at the control panel in front of her. The ship's radar was picking up something that didn't belong. At first, it was just a small blip, barely noticeable amidst the background noise of space. But as Lyra focused, the signal became clearer, sharper. It was a frequency unlike any she had ever encountered. It wasn't just static or random noise. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate. Her fingers hovered over the controls, her mind racing. Could it be a mistake? A glitch? No, the signal was too structured for that. It was coming from a region marked as forbidden in Xanthari records, the so-called human sector. Lyra felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Her heart began to beat faster as she realized what this could mean. Could the humans really have survived? Or was this some distant, desperate remnant of their once great civilization, clinging to life in the deepest reaches of space? Lyra hesitated, the doubts swirling in her mind. She was supposed to investigate, to explore the unknown, but the idea of facing the myth of the humans, something she had thought impossible, sent a jolt of fear through her. Yet, in that moment, she felt something else as well: curiosity, an undeniable need to know, to understand the truth. She took a deep breath, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. She couldn't turn back now. The myth was calling her, and it demanded to be unraveled. With a press of a button, she set her course toward the signal's origin, her heart pounding with the thrill of the unknown. Lyra wasn't just about to encounter a myth. She was about to confront a truth that could shake the foundation of everything she had ever known. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was ready. The hum of the ship's engines echoed in the cockpit as Lyra's mind raced. She had expected the signal to fizzle out, to be nothing more than a fleeting anomaly. But it persisted, growing steadily stronger, clearer with each passing moment. She could no longer deny it. Something out there was sending a message, and it was undeniably human. Lyra adjusted her ship's trajectory, her eyes never leaving the radar display. She could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest, making it harder to breathe. The human sector was an area of space marked off in Xanthari records, but it had been sealed off as a myth for generations. It was considered a place where no intelligent life remained, a cosmic graveyard of a failed civilization. And now she was heading straight for it. The stars outside blurred as her ship cut through space, her pulse quickening with every passing second. Lyra tried to focus on the data scrolling across the console, but her mind kept wandering back to the same question. What was out there? Her thoughts twisted in a loop, the possibility of encountering humans pushing her beyond the boundaries of logic and reason. Could they still be alive? If so, what would they look like? What had they become after all these years? And why hadn't anyone heard from them? As the ship traveled deeper into uncharted space, the signal grew stronger still. It no longer seemed like a random glitch in her instruments, but a deliberate and calculated call. Lyra could feel the intensity building in her chest, the weight of this discovery heavier than any physical load she had ever lifted. This wasn't just a mission now. It was the beginning of something monumental, something that could shake the very foundations of everything she had been taught. Then, just as Lyra thought she might explode from the tension, the screen blinked. A new set of coordinates flashed on the radar. The signal was coming from a massive object, a ship, or at least what seemed like a ship. It wasn't a typical Xanthari vessel. It was too organic. The structure appeared to be a mix of jagged metallic edges and strange rounded contours. There was an unmistakable feeling of raw, imperfect power about it. This wasn't a sleek, elegant craft built for efficiency. It was something else entirely. Something that screamed survival and adaptation. Lyra leaned forward in her seat, her fingers trembling as she tapped the comm panel, sending out a quiet pulse to the strange ship. A faint static buzzed back at her, but no clear reply came. She sent another message, this time a direct inquiry. Asterisk, this is Lyra of the Xanthari scouting vessel *Celerus*. Identify yourselves. Asterisk. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever, a gap between worlds that felt too large to bridge. Suddenly, the comm system crackled again, louder this time. The message was almost drowned in static, but it was unmistakably human. The voice was deep, gravelly, and calm in a way that unsettled Lyra. Asterisk, we're here. Asterisk, it said simply. Asterisk, and we've been here for a long time. Asterisk. Lyra's heart skipped. She hadn't expected an answer. Lyra's hands tightened on the controls as she guided the Celerus closer to the mysterious vessel. The stars outside the viewport seemed to grow more distant with every passing moment, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. The radio was silent now, the voice of the human captain gone, leaving nothing but a strange, unsettling calm in its wake. Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of discovering something far beyond her understanding. The object that had once appeared as a faint blip on her radar had grown larger with every moment, its silhouette becoming more distinct. It was massive, far larger than anything Lyra had ever seen. Its surface was rough, almost primitive-looking, with jagged edges and rust-colored streaks running along its hull. The vessel was clearly old, its metal worn and pitted from years of exposure to the harsh environment of space. Yet there was something about it that felt almost alive, as though the ship had adapted over time, evolving to survive in the vacuum of space. Lyra's stomach tightened as she drew closer, her sensors picking up strange energy readings. The ship's power output was minimal, but it seemed to fluctuate erratically, as if it were struggling to maintain some semblance of stability. Yet, despite its apparent age and the unkempt nature of the craft, there was no mistaking the advanced technology beneath the surface. Lyra could sense the remnants of human ingenuity embedded in every crevice, even in the irregularities of its design. The comm system crackled to life once more, the voice of the human captain cutting through the static. Asterisk, we're ready for your arrival. Asterisk, he said, the words measured and calm. Asterisk, approach with caution. Asterisk. Lyra took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had prepared for many things, but nothing had quite prepared her for this moment. The human myth was unfolding before her eyes, and with every second, it felt more and more like she was standing on the edge of something monumental. She had been trained to observe, to document, to learn. But this wasn't something she could simply catalog and report back to her people. This was a living, breathing mystery. The Cellaris slowly approached the docking bay of the human vessel. There was no visible crew, no sign of life outside the ship, just the hollow emptiness of space. But Lyra's instincts told her that there was far more happening on board than met the eye. Her fingers hovered over the controls, her mind racing. Should she be cautious, or should she take the leap and board the human ship? What awaited her on the other side of the airlock? Before she could make a decision, the docking bay door slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing the dimly lit interior. Lyra couldn't see much, but the faint hum of the ship's power systems resonated in the quiet, adding to the eerie atmosphere. There was no turning back now. The myth had drawn her in, and now she had to face it head-on. With a final, steadying breath, Lyra engaged the docking mechanism, guiding the Cellaris into the bay. The ship's hull made a soft clunk as it locked into place, and she felt a slight jolt as the seals engaged, creating an airtight connection. The air inside the ship smelled stale, like a place long abandoned, but there was an underlying warmth that suggested life had once, maybe still did, inhabit these halls. As Lyra powered down the systems and stood to leave, she found herself wondering if she was about to meet the remnants of a dead civilization, or something far more dangerous. The myths had warned that humanity was a race of violent survivors, but they had also painted them as weak, their resolve broken long ago. Yet here she was, standing at the threshold of their ship, about to step into their world. With a deep breath, she stepped toward the airlock, her mind swirling with questions and uncertainty. This was no longer a mission. This was an encounter with the past, and perhaps a glimpse into the future of humanity itself. The airlock door slid open with a groan, revealing the dark, hollow interior of the human ship. Lyra hesitated for just a moment, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her chest. The darkness before her felt alive, thick with the scent of old metal and stale air, and yet there was something else, something faintly organic in the atmosphere, like the ship itself was breathing. With a deep breath, she stepped through the threshold, the soft hiss of her boots on the metal floor, the only sound breaking the silence. The interior was dimly lit, with flickering lights lining the walls at uneven intervals, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the narrow corridors. The ship had clearly seen better days. The walls were scarred, some sections patched with mismatched panels, others covered in a strange film that Lyra couldn't quite identify. The decay was apparent, yet there was an undeniable sense of persistence to the vessel, as if it had been fighting for its survival through every year of neglect. As she walked deeper into the ship, Lyra's sensors began to ping with strange readings. The power output was erratic, fluctuating in a way that no advanced Xanthari technology ever would. It was almost as if the ship was functioning on sheer willpower alone. She could hear the soft hum of machinery running in the background, but there was no sign of a crew. No movement, no voices. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. If the humans had survived all these years, where were they now? Had they gone into hiding? Or worse, had they fallen to some kind of madness after being stranded in deep space for so long? A door ahead of her creaked open, and a figure stepped into the dim light. Lyra froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure was human, tall, rugged, with a face weathered by time and experience. His clothes were simple, worn, but functional. His hair was short, but streaked with gray, and his eyes were dark, steady, and observant. He didn't seem surprised to see her. In fact, he looked almost expectant. "Welcome aboard," he said, his voice deep and calm, but with an edge of something hard, something unyielding. His gaze flicked briefly to her uniform before meeting her eyes. "I'm Captain Thomas. I assume you're here because of the signal." Lyra took a step forward, trying to steady her nerves. This was it. She had expected to encounter humans, but the reality of meeting one, the myth made flesh, was far more overwhelming than she could have imagined. The stories had painted humans as brutal, savage creatures, but here before her stood a man who radiated quiet strength and control. He was no primitive beast. He was a survivor. "Yes," Lyra said, her voice betraying the mix of awe and curiosity swirling inside her. "I detected your signal. I didn't think you were real." Captain Thomas nodded, his expression unreadable. "We're as real as anything else. We've been surviving out here longer than anyone thought possible." Lyra's eyes widened slightly. "Surviving. But you've been lost. Disappeared. The Zinthari records. They say humanity was wiped out." "Not wiped out," Captain Thomas corrected, his voice almost amused. "We were just forgotten. But we didn't die. We adapted. We learned to survive in the most hostile environments, with whatever we had. And we never stopped fighting." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Lyra found herself struggling to process the magnitude of what he was saying. She had come here expecting to find a dying relic of a once proud species. Instead, she had encountered a human who seemed anything but defeated. As if sensing her thoughts, Captain Thomas spoke again. "The Zinthari thought we were a myth because they never understood us. They didn't understand what we were capable of. They thought we were weak because we had wars, because we fought among ourselves. But that's the thing about humans. We keep fighting, no matter what. We never give up." Lyra could hear the conviction in his voice, the steady belief that had carried his people through unimaginable hardship. And for the first time, the stories of humanity, the ones she had dismissed as legend, began to feel real. The humans weren't a myth. They weren't primitive. They were something else entirely, resilient, enduring, capable of surviving against all odds. Captain Thomas studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing as though reading her every thought. "So, what do you want, Zinthari?" he asked. "You didn't come all this way just to marvel at our survival. What is it you really seek?" Lyra swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She wasn't just facing a myth. She was facing a people, a civilization that had endured when others would have crumbled. And now, she had to decide what to do with that truth. "I came for answers," Lyra said softly. "I came to understand how you survived, and why the Zinthari were wrong about you." Captain Thomas's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no joy in it, only the knowing look of someone who had seen far too much. "Then you've come to the right place," he said, turning to walk down the dark corridor. "I'll show you, but you won't like everything you learn." Lyra followed him into the depths of the ship, knowing that whatever lay ahead would change everything she had ever known about humanity, and perhaps even herself. Lyra followed Captain Thomas through the narrow corridors of the human ship, her boots echoing softly against the metal floor. The walls were lined with various equipment, some she recognized, but much of it was old, repurposed, or jury-rigged together. Every corner seemed to hide something new, a strange mix of ingenuity and desperation that made Lyra's stomach tighten. As they walked deeper into the ship, the flickering lights became more frequent, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The hum of the power systems grew louder, but it was erratic, like the pulse of a dying heart. Despite the decayed appearance of the vessel, there was an undeniable sense of purpose in its design. The ship had been maintained, patched together, and kept alive for so long, not out of necessity alone, but out of defiance. It was clear that the humans aboard were not just surviving. They were fighting to exist. Captain Thomas led her into a large open room that looked like a control center of some kind. The walls were lined with monitors, all displaying various data streams that Lyra couldn't quite interpret. There were maps of distant stars, blinking warnings about radiation levels, and strange charts that seemed to measure things beyond her understanding. The room was dim, but the soft glow of the screens provided just enough light to reveal the worn edges of the equipment and the thick dust that had accumulated over the years. "Welcome to the heart of our ship," Captain Thomas said, his voice carrying an odd mix of pride and resignation. He gestured to the array of screens in front of them. "This is where we keep track of the systems that keep us alive, and the things we need to find to stay alive. Our ship might look like it's falling apart, but we've been holding it together for longer than you'd believe." Lyra surveyed the room, her mind whirring. How have you been able to survive like this, in isolation, for so long?" Captain Thomas didn't immediately answer. He moved toward one of the terminals, his fingers tapping on the dusty keys with practiced ease. "Survival," he said finally, "is about adaptation. We were never meant to be alone in deep space, but when the war broke out, when the galaxy turned its back on us, we had no choice but to adapt. We learned to fix what was broken. We learned to fight when we needed to, and we learned how to hide when it was necessary." Lyra's brow furrowed. "A war? What war are you talking about?" Thomas paused, then turned back to face her. His eyes were sharp, unflinching. "The war that led to our exile. The Xanthari played a part in it, but you wouldn't have known that. You were too busy expanding your own empire, thinking we were a myth. We fought, humans fought, against a coalition of species who feared our potential. They thought we were too dangerous, too unpredictable, so they tried to wipe us out. And they almost did." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. She had known of conflicts between species, but nothing of the scale Thomas was describing. "You're saying the Xanthari were part of this war?" Captain Thomas nodded slowly. "We fought, and we lost. At least, that's how it seemed at first. But we didn't die. We just disappeared. We were sent to the outer fringes of the galaxy, to a place so far from civilization that no one would come looking for us. We were left to rot. But we didn't rot. We rebuilt." A heavy silence hung in the air as the weight of his words sank in. Lyra had always seen the Xanthari as a people of order, of reason. To think they had played a part in the destruction of an entire civilization, one she had been taught was nothing but a myth, felt like a betrayal. She had been raised on the belief that humans had been nothing but a brief, violent blip in history. And now, standing here, hearing this human's words, she realized how little she knew of the true history. How many of you are still alive?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Captain Thomas's expression darkened. "Not many. We lost a lot of people over the years. We've been fighting for survival for so long. But there's still a core group of us. We're survivors. And now, we're not alone anymore. We're being hunted again, and we can't keep hiding forever." Lyra's heart raced. "Hunted? By who?" "The same people who tried to destroy us before," Thomas replied, his tone flat. "They've been watching. They've been waiting. And now they know we're still out here." The realization hit Lyra like a blow. The humans hadn't been wiped out. They had been driven into hiding, left to survive in the farthest reaches of space. And now, they were being hunted, their existence still a threat to those who feared their potential. The Xanthari had thought they were a myth. But the truth was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. As Lyra absorbed the gravity of what she had just learned, Captain Thomas's eyes softened. "You wanted answers," he said quietly. "Well, now you have them. But the question is, what are you going to do with them?" Lyra looked up at him, her mind spinning. The myth of humanity had shattered before her eyes, revealing a truth that no one had been prepared for. The Xanthari's history, her own people's beliefs, everything was suddenly in question. And in that moment, she knew that her encounter with Captain Thomas was just the beginning. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. Humanity's story wasn't over. It was only just beginning again. Lyra stood in the heart of the ship, her mind still reeling from the revelations Captain Thomas had shared. The walls seemed to close in around her, the dim glow of the monitors casting an eerie light over the room. The silence was suffocating, but it wasn't just the lack of noise. It was the weight of the truth. Everything she had known about the galaxy, about humanity, and about her own people had been shattered in a few short moments. Captain Thomas stood across from her, his gaze unwavering. He seemed to sense her inner turmoil, his expression a mixture of resolve and resignation. "The Zinthari weren't the only ones who underestimated us," he said quietly. "But they were the ones who helped seal our fate. And now you've learned the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Lyra swallowed hard, the tension in her chest making it difficult to think clearly. She had come here to find answers, to uncover the truth about the human myth. But now that she had it, she was unsure how to proceed. She had never been trained to deal with a situation like this. Her mission had always been clear: to gather information, to report back to her people. But now, the lines between right and wrong, truth and deception, had blurred beyond recognition. "I don't know what to do with it," she admitted, her voice softer than she intended. This changes everything. The Zinthari, the way we viewed the galaxy, it's all based on lies. How am I supposed to go back and tell them this?" Captain Thomas's eyes softened, but his tone remained steady. "You can't go back. Not the same way. Once you've seen the truth, it changes you. There's no going back to the way things were." Lyra nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in. She had known this mission would be significant, but she hadn't expected it to force her to choose between the people she had always trusted and the undeniable reality standing before her. She had thought she would find the remnants of a broken people, clinging to survival in the shadows of a forgotten war. Instead, she had found a people who had adapted, who had survived, and who were still fighting. "What will you do now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You're still being hunted, right? You said they're coming for you." Thomas's expression darkened. "Yes, they're coming. And when they do, we won't be ready. Not entirely. We're not just fighting for our survival anymore. We're fighting to reclaim our place in the galaxy, to remind everyone that humanity is not a myth. It's not something to be dismissed or forgotten." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. The human captain's words rang with a fierce intensity. She had seen the resolve in his eyes, the fire that burned in him. It was the same kind of resolve she had seen in her own people, back when they had been on the rise, before they had grown complacent, before they had turned inward, thinking their superiority was unquestionable. She felt a surge of something within her. It wasn't just empathy or curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something that resonated with her own experiences, her own doubts about the direction of her people. Humanity's fight for survival had been long, but perhaps they weren't as different from the Zinthari as she had always been taught. "I can't just leave you here," Lyra said, her voice growing stronger. "I can't walk away from this. I have to help you. I owe it to you, to what I've learned." Thomas studied her for a long moment as though weighing her words, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right. You owe it to yourself to make your own choice now. And the truth is, we need all the help we can get, but it won't be easy, and it won't be safe." Lyra's mind raced as the implications of his words settled into place. She had come here seeking knowledge, but now, she found herself faced with something much bigger. She was no longer just a scout, a passive observer of the galaxy's mysteries. She was a part of something much more profound, a conflict that reached far beyond the survival of one species. This was about the very future of humanity, the Zinthari, and the galaxy itself. "I'm ready," Lyra said, her voice steady and resolute. "Tell me what I need to do." Captain Thomas nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "There's a plan, but it's going to take more than just one ship. It's going to take allies, those who will stand with us, not against us. The Zinthari might have forgotten us, but we haven't forgotten the galaxy. We will rise again, and we'll need every last hand willing to fight." Lyra's resolve solidified. She knew she couldn't go back to the Zinthari now, not with the truth of humanity's survival burning in her mind. But she also knew that she couldn't let this myth of humanity, remain hidden any longer. It was time for the galaxy to know the truth. Time for the galaxy to understand that the humans were no longer a forgotten race, but a people ready to reclaim their place. Her journey had only just begun. Lyra stood in the control room, her mind awash with conflicting emotions. Her hands trembled slightly as she glanced at the map of the galaxy displayed on the screen in front of her. The coordinates marked by Captain Thomas glowed softly, like a trail of breadcrumbs leading her deeper into the unknown. She had expected this mission to be about uncovering the past, about learning the truth of the human myth. But now, it was about something far greater. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was involved in the fight for humanity's survival, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Captain Thomas was busy at another terminal, typing commands with swift, practiced motions. He was clearly focused, but Lyra could see the weight of exhaustion behind his eyes. It was a constant battle for survival, and every day felt like a new struggle. But now, things were changing. They weren't alone in this fight anymore. They had Lyra, and perhaps others like her, who would stand with them. "We're reaching out to the only allies we have left," Thomas said, his voice low but determined. "They're scattered across the galaxy, hidden, and most are in the same situation we're in, surviving, fighting, waiting. But they're loyal. They'll come if we can convince them that it's time to rise." Lyra nodded, a sense of urgency building in her chest. This wasn't just about gathering allies. This was about making the galaxy aware of the truth, about proving that humanity wasn't a myth and that they had the strength to fight back. For far too long, the human race had been underestimated, ignored, and discarded. But now, the galaxy would learn that humanity had not only survived, they had thrived in the shadows. "I'll contact my people," Lyra said, her voice firm. "I have connections, people I trust. If you need allies, I can help. But we can't do this alone. The Zinthari will come after us, and they'll come hard." Thomas's expression was grim, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "We know, but it's the risk we'll have to take. If we don't act now, the galaxy will continue to think of us as nothing more than a faded memory, a myth. And if the Zinthari get their way, that will be the end of us. We can't let that happen." Lyra swallowed, the gravity of their situation weighing on her. She had never imagined she would be caught in the middle of such a vast, intergalactic struggle. The Zinthari had always been seen as the dominant force, the unquestioned power of the galaxy. But now, it was clear. The humans were far from broken. They had been pushed to the edges, cast aside. But they had endured, and they were ready to fight for their place once more. She turned back to the map on the screen, tracing the pathways that connected the scattered human factions. It was a long shot, but if they could unite, they would be a force to be reckoned with. She knew the risks. She knew the danger. But for the first time since she had arrived on this ship, she felt a sense of purpose stirring deep within her. "We'll need a strategy," Lyra said, her mind already working through the logistics. "We can't just go in blind. The Zinthari are formidable. If we're going to do this, we need to strike at their core, hit them where they least expect it." Thomas raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by her focus. "You're thinking like a strategist. I like it." Lyra felt a surge of confidence, the realization that she could play a pivotal role in this mission, giving her a sense of empowerment she hadn't expected. She was no longer just an outsider, no longer just the one who observed. She was now part of something bigger, a movement that had the potential to change the course of the galaxy. The door to the control room slid open, and a young crew member entered, his face pale with anxiety. "Captain, we've received a transmission," he said, his voice tight. "It's from one of the factions. They've agreed to meet, but they're requesting more information about our plans." Thomas looked at Lyra, his gaze steady. "We need to convince them that this isn't just about survival. It's about reclaiming our place in the galaxy. We've been fighting alone for far too long, and we need everyone to know that it's time to unite." Lyra nodded. "I'll speak with them. If they're going to join us, they need to understand what's at stake." Thomas turned back to the young crew member. "Prepare the transmission." Let's see if we can make our case." As the crew member hurried off, Lyra stood for a moment longer, staring at the map of the galaxy. This was more than just a battle for survival. This was a fight for humanity's legacy, for their right to exist in a galaxy that had long since written them off. And as she turned to follow Captain Thomas, a new sense of determination filled her. The storm was coming. But now, Lyra knew they weren't just waiting for it. They were going to meet it head-on, and they were going to fight for their place in the stars. Lyra's heart pounded as the transmission screen flickered to life, casting a cold blue light across the room. The faint hum of the ship's failing systems seemed louder now, almost drowned out by the anticipation hanging in the air. Across from her, Captain Thomas stood with his arms crossed, his gaze steady and calculating. They were about to make their case to the first of many factions who would determine humanity's future. The screen showed the image of a grim-faced leader, an older man with silver streaks running through his dark hair. His eyes, sharp and calculating, were fixed on Lyra and Thomas as the connection stabilized. Behind him, a backdrop of ship controls buzzed, but the man's posture remained rigid, like someone used to making hard decisions. "This is Commander Vekar of the Ethereal Fleet." The man's voice came through, stern but not unfriendly. "You requested this meeting. I assume it's important, or you wouldn't have bothered. What's so urgent?" Lyra took a breath, gathering her thoughts. She could feel the weight of Thomas's gaze on her, but this was her moment to speak, her moment to convince them that the humans still had a place in the galaxy. She stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "The Zinthari believe humanity is nothing but a myth," Lyra began, her eyes never leaving Commander Vekar. "They think we were wiped out, forgotten, lost to time. But the truth is, we survived. Humanity is still here, still fighting, and we're ready to make our stand. We need your help." Vekar's eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. "You claim to be the last remnants of humanity. How can I trust that? And why should we risk everything for a race that has been absent for centuries?" Lyra swallowed the lump in her throat, but held his gaze. "Because the Zinthari are coming. And if we don't unite now, if we don't stop them, there will be nothing left of anyone. Not just humanity, but everyone. The Zinthari have turned their sights back on us, and they won't stop until they've wiped us all out." Vekar's silence spoke volumes. For a long moment, his expression was unreadable, and Lyra could feel the tension building in the room. The fate of everything seemed to hang in the balance, and if they didn't convince Vekar, the resistance they needed would remain scattered, weak, and vulnerable. "The Zinthari have the might of the galaxy behind them," Vekar said finally, his voice low. "You ask us to risk our fleets and our people, to fight a war we didn't start. Why should we believe that humanity can actually win this?" Captain Thomas spoke now, his voice firm and unwavering. "Because we've survived this long, against odds that no one thought possible. We've adapted, we've learned, and we've never stopped fighting. Humanity doesn't give up, Commander. We've never given up." Vekar stared at Thomas for a moment, his eyes flicking over to Lyra briefly before returning to the captain. He seemed to weigh the words carefully, as though measuring the sincerity in them. Lyra could see the shift in his demeanor, the subtle softening of his stance. The Aetherial were known for their pragmatism, their reluctance to ally with anyone unless it benefited them. But humanity had something that Vekar could understand: survival, resilience, and an unyielding spirit. "I'm not convinced," Vekar said, but his tone had changed. There was a hint of something else, perhaps respect, or even curiosity. "But I'm willing to consider your offer. Show us the proof that humanity is what you say it is. If you can convince the Ethereal Fleet that this war is worth fighting, then we'll join you. But if you fail, I can't risk my people." Thomas stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Vekar's. "We don't need to convince you with words, Commander. We'll show you. We'll show you what humanity is capable of." Lyra watched as Thomas turned to her, his expression resolute. "Prepare the ship. We'll give them a demonstration they'll never forget." She nodded, feeling the surge of adrenaline. This was it. There was no turning back now. They had to prove humanity's strength, not just through words, but through action. The galaxy had to understand that they were no longer a myth. They were a force to be reckoned with. As she turned to leave, Thomas called after her. "Lyra, remember, this is more than just a fight for humanity's survival. It's a fight for the future of the galaxy. If we fail, everything we've worked for, everything we've fought for, will be lost. But if we succeed..." Lyra turned back to face him, her eyes burning with determination. "If we succeed, we change the galaxy forever. Humanity isn't just going to survive. We're going to lead." With those words, Lyra left the control room and made her way to the ship's command center. The storm was here, and humanity would face it head-on. No more hiding, no more myths. They were ready to reclaim their place in the galaxy.